everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Cordon. I'm your host, Callum. Joining me on the show today is Louis Dade once again. This episode is brought to you by ORTC Clothing Co., as well as Ray White Henley Beach. Make sure that you go to ORTC for your trendy clothing, something that's perfect to wear to the test match. And if you're looking to buy your property, make sure that you head over to Ray White at Henley Beach, just behind Henley Square Foodland. Louis, thanks for joining me again, mate. How you going?
Not too bad at all. Thanks, Callum. And I very much enjoyed listening to your intro. You've always been at the height of both fashion and being a property mogul like yourself. It's great to see you found some like-minded sponsors.
Yeah, thanks to our sponsors for jumping on. And we've got some more sponsorships to announce over the next couple of weeks. And we've been able to lock in our first couple of guests for the interviews at Pod Booth Studios. So that's going to be really exciting. The IPL has already started. Unfortunately, we couldn't get this preview out in time. Just had some unfortunate circumstances with my family. My grandmother passed away during the week. So the preview has been delayed, but I'm sure that we will still be able to catch you up on anything that you may have missed over the first three games. So to start with, Gujarat won by 5 wickets over CSK, playing in front of 110,000 people, which is incredible. Such an impressive stadium there in Ahmedabad. Punjab won by 7 runs over Kolkata Knight Riders, thanks to the Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method. And Lucknow Super Giants won by 50 runs over David Warner's Delhi Capitals. So, Louis, any results in particular stand out from the first 3 games?
I think if we're looking at it, and firstly, the big thing to call out there, you're right, was how good it was to see a massive crowd there. Obviously, a 6-digit crowd's always great to pull that kind of attendance into a game. I think it's interesting. I mean, the three games have been played, all been relatively high scoring, and if we're looking here, the winning scores being 182, 191, and 193. Obviously, mindful of the Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method, as you mentioned. It's pretty crazy, but it looks like we're heading towards what seems to be a batting friendly IPL based off the small sample size. That's for sure.
And something that's going to be really important for the teams this year is the home ground advantage. The last 3 years of the IPL have been basically played in neutral venues, 2 years in the UAE, as well as last year where there were 4 grounds in Mumbai used to limit the teams travelling with COVID still lurking around. But it's great to see everything pretty well getting back to normal and lots of fans in the stadium. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the teams one by one in alphabetical order, and then we're going to rank the teams at the end. So Louis and I will rank the teams towards the end of the episode and make sure that you comment your team's rankings in the comment system, as well as mention who was your best buy at the auction, even though it was a few months ago. So, Louis, let's start with the 4-time champions, CSK. Went down in the first game to Gujarat, but I've still got them pretty high on my rankings this year. From what we saw in the first game, they bat really deep. They had Santner, I think, coming in at number 9. But I think bowling options might be a little bit of a concern for them. We know that Kyle Jamieson was meant to be playing for them, but unfortunately got a stress fracture in his back. But Louis, what do you think about Chennai this year and how they've structured up?
Yeah, look, you're right. The batting is pretty deep, and that's probably the positive, I guess, if we're looking here at the outlay. It's interesting. They've obviously doubled up on having both. On having both Jadeja and Santner in the team, which is always an interesting combination because I think 2 cricketers that bring very similar skill sets to the table, but in those conditions, it makes perfect sense. I think the positive for them coming out of the first game, which was obviously a loss, was that most of their bigger name players didn't necessarily fire with the bat. Obviously we look at Deepak Chahar, who's been going around the circuit for a long time now, and he's been a pretty consistent performer. But for me, if I'm looking at the key differentiators, it's going to come down to a couple of things. One, what do they get out of their two English internationals, being both all-round talents? And also the question we have every year is how much does MS Dhoni have in the tank? So I think they're going to have to win games more with the bat than the ball. But if we're looking purely at squad structure and that side of things, I think it's going to come down to 3 or 4 key players and how they perform, if you ask me.
Yeah, CSK do a really good job of finding some unhidden, talents, and just finding someone and plucking them out of nowhere who ends up making a big difference for them. One thing that I'll probably challenge you on there is I'd probably be having Tikshana in the lineup instead of Mitch Santner. I think Tikshana offers something a little bit different compared to Santner. I know Santner can be handy with the bat, but Tikshana bowls really well in those power play overs up front.
Yeah, and look, I can probably tend to agree with that. I think if you're looking at, picking which international players you're going to go with is always a big part of that as well, right? And I guess, leaving Santner out gives you a little bit of flexibility. I think that, you called it out as well. I think between the lines there is that CSK have done a good job with always having, I guess, pretty star-studded rosters, but been able to find a lot of local talent as well. And I think the innings in the first game by Ruturaj as well was pretty important and another sign of some strong local young Indian talent, I guess.
Yeah, Gaikwad's been, a pretty handy player for them, and they've chosen to retain him after he really struggled last year, particularly in the first half of the season. But it was good to see him make an impressive 92 on Friday night. Lewis, let's move into Ricky Ponting's men, the Delhi Capitals, captained by David Warne this year after the unfortunate circumstances to Rishabh Pant. They lost by 50 runs in the first game to Lucknow Super Giants. I just feel with the loss of Rishabh Pant as their spiritual leader, Delhi might struggle a little bit more this year, but any team who plays under Ricky Ponting is always going to be super competitive. And it was good from an Australian point of view last night that David Warner was able to make a half century. Hopefully for Australia, that's good signs in the lead up to the World Test Championship in the Ashes. And David Warner's a confidence player, as we've seen for many years now. So, Lewis, what are your thoughts about the Delhi Capitals?
Yeah, I think obviously the opening loss isn't necessarily a great sign, but I'm pretty confident in this team's ability. I think the biggest question on paper, at least if you ask me, is kind of depth in the seam bowling department, I guess you'd call it. Obviously it's perhaps not the deepest roster on paper if you kind of break it down from that level. I think having Mitch Marsh in the team coming off the one-day series he's just had is really positive. But from my side of things, I actually think the balance is pretty healthy here. You mentioned Ricky Ponting, who's a big differentiator. I think we talked last time on the podcast about Kuldeep Yadav and what he brings to the table. So no, I like it. I think from their end, if Warner can fire, the team will certainly flow on from there. I think Warner as a leader has always been more of a lead by example than lead by strategy kind of guy. So I think he will very much set the tone for the season they have. But there is definitely some level of concern in my mind about the fast bowling depth. And I think that also shows to a certain extent with the lofty total they conceded in the first round, although mindful of a small sample size as well.
And Lewis, were there any pickups from the auction that you really liked with Delhi? Riley Russo was probably the biggest of their pickups, and Phil Salt as well. So any of those two stand out because they decided to go with Russo over Salt in the game last night.
Yeah, I think Phil Salt's obviously got more long-term potential. He actually played a little bit at our hometown BBL Adelaide Strikers, and I thought that was mixed. But I think that weirdly enough, I think the conditions over there, as far as the boundary size and a few other things, will suit him a bit better. I do like the veteran presence of Riley Russo, but I really don't necessarily think he's got. I don't necessarily rate him that highly as far as an international selection. I think Phil Salt's going to be the one to watch there if they give him a couple of games to get his feet underneath him, because he can be quite a damaging player and is certainly not afraid to have a dip up the top there if that's where they bat him.
Yeah, and Rosman Power, who's just been named the captain of the West Indies T20 side, he didn't get many runs last night, but he's someone that I really like coming in at number 5, number 6 to finish off the innings. And as you mentioned, the fast bowlers, I feel like they'll be a little bit undermanned in the fast bowling department until Nokia and Ngidi arrive, because they're playing in a one-day series between South Africa and the Netherlands, so they should be joining the squad in the next week. Lewis, let's move into the Gujarat Titans, champions last year in their inaugural season in the IPL. They looked really impressive the other night against CSK. Not too many changes in the team, but they did sustain a big injury, with Kane Williamson being ruled out for the rest of the tournament. Now, I thought he was a great buy at 2 crore, considering he was 12 crore last year with Sunrisers Hyderabad. But how do you think they could fill that role going forward? And are there any Australian overseas players that could potentially come in?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned obviously that announcement that I think as of 2 hours ago he's officially been ruled out. This is so hot off the press that they haven't even had time to announce a replacement yet. I mean, it depends, I guess, and this is probably a question I'll throw back on you, is do you think that the move to pick up Williamson, was that purely about on-field input, or was that also about bringing a seasoned veteran and I guess international player into the change room? Because I guess what you're looking for in a replacement is two entirely different propositions, depending on what you think Gujarat probably valued more about what Williamson brought to the table.
I think they're probably looking for an on-field experience, someone that Hardik Pandya can lean on. Hardik Pandya did really well in his first season of captaincy, taking them to the title, obviously. But I think, just having some extra support around him, potentially with larger crowds, it could be a lot more difficult for Hardik to captain Gujarat. But Kane Williamson is just a class player, and we've seen at his best in T20, he's just an absolute handful.
Yeah, I think from my end, I mean, if we're putting the Australian hat on, look to Matty Wade as an option there. I mean, obviously, very different player to Kane Williamson, but I think he kind of fits that mold. Probably a little bit different of a change room kind of operator, one would have to think. But I think at this late stage, I think Matthew Wade's a pretty good idea for an on-field replacement, if you ask me. Obviously, David Miller's someone as well that comes to mind.
Yeah, David Miller will be joining the team very shortly. He's just tied up in that South Africa-Netherlands ODI series. Yeah, I very much think that Matthew Wade could bat at 3. I thought Gill looked really solid at the top of the order, and I wouldn't be changing the opening combination after the other night. But yeah, Wade could come in at 3. I feel like someone like a Travis Head, if he wanted to go and play IPL, he would be a handy replacement player. Left-hander, so different dynamic, obviously, but Travis Head pretty much captains every team that he's in, whether it's, T20, obviously captains the strikers here and the Redbacks as well. So he's someone that, Gujarat could potentially look to, someone like Chris Lynn as well, who's come off good form in the UAE T20 league, as well as the Big Bash as well. So a number of different options for Gujarat to consider, and I've got them pretty high up on my list this year. Lewis, let's look at Kolkata Knight Riders now. Unfortunately, went down last night to Punjab by 7 runs, but with the Duckworth-Lewis-Stern method. They're a hard team to get a read on for me, because I feel like at their best, with Dre Russ firing and potentially getting Shreyas Iyer back in the next few weeks, their best is very good, but also their worst, as we saw last year, was not fantastic. So what's the best way to get a read on this team?
Can I be honest here? I just think there's not enough batting. I'm all for positivity, and I think this team could certainly be a mid-table contender. But I think if we're looking at people legitimately making a run at the title, there just isn't enough batting. And you mentioned the injury to Shreyas Iyer. I think that not only does he obviously leave a hole from a captaincy perspective, but also it's a glaring hole in their batting lineup. Not that inexperienced batting lineups haven't occasionally proved successful in the IPL, I just think there's not enough there from a batting perspective. And look, the bowling on paper, it looks pretty good. If you're talking about obviously Sunil Narayan goes needs no introduction, but guys like Lockie Ferguson, guys like Umesh Yadav. But at the end of the day, I think that there's not enough batting there. And I mean, quite frankly, from a bowling perspective, the first game wasn't the most inspiring performance. So I do think this is a plucky team, but I struggle to see a road to a deep championship run from my side for these guys.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Someone that I think could be played in the next couple of games would be Lytton Das. He had a great T20 World Cup here in Australia. He was picked up for 1 crore, so a great buy. I know they've got the Afghanistan wicketkeeper in there at the moment, and he's certainly very dynamic, but I would probably be looking to get Das into that lineup in the next few games. What are your thoughts about that?
I think, you raised the point about the way Lytton Das, performed in the T20 World Cup. I think that your call there to do a bit of a swap's perfectly fair, especially in a team that I think is going to have to look to make changes early if they can't rack up a couple of wins. I think that you're better off making the change earlier in the tournament and giving the team time to kind of gel and build a record than leaving things too late in the piece. So, no, Lytton Das has got a good amount of experience at international level. Obviously, has played a fair bit in similar-ish conditions. And I think he's someone, particularly you mentioned the price he was picked up for. I think he's someone that could very well be a stabilising presence. Only of wicket keeping, but more from a batting perspective for this team as well.
I know we talked about Kane Williamson, and he got injured in the first game, but I feel like he would have been perfect for KKR. Just a bit of experience, someone who could either open or bat at 3, allow Shreyas Iyer to come in at number 4. I know their top order is, been pretty consistent for the last 3 or 4 years, but Venkatesh Iyer isn't in the form that he once was. We saw him used as the impact player the other night. And his strike rate's not been what it was in the last couple of years. So, lots to think about for KKR. Let's move on to a team that I'm really bullish about, and that's the Lucknow Super Giants. Impressive 50-run win over the Delhi Capitals in the first game. I think their first 11 on paper is probably one of the best in the comp. We saw Mark Wood bowl with real pace and real aggression last night, taking 5 for 14. But it's just the players that they've got in the surrounds. They've got Krunal Pandya, Avish Khan. We saw Kyle Mayers score some very impressive runs. He was really potent in the T20 series between the West Indies and South Africa. KL Rahul is a class player at the top. Nicholas Puram was bought for 16 crore at the auction. They've got the Hulk, Marcus Stoinis in there as well. Quinton de Kock to join the team in the next few weeks as well. Just a team that I'm super bullish on. They've got Daniel Sams in there as well, Ravi Bishnoi, Amit Mishra as well as a spare leg spinner in the squad, Young Cad as well, the left arm pacer. I don't see too many holes in their squad.
No, and you're right. For me, the biggest hole I had on paper coming into the tournament was, potentially it was really Mark Wood's fitness was almost the biggest question mark I had attached to this team coming into it, and to have him come out and perform the way he did. I think it was 5 for 30 odd from memory. The ball he bowled to rip both Prithvi Shaw, but also Mitch Marsh's stumps out of the ground. I think he clocked 147 clicks on both deliveries, and we've seen Mark Wood for a number of years now. He feels like he's even quicker than the speedo when he's bowling his best. I like Kyle Mayers in the sense that he does a little bit of everything. He's also a good fielder. I think he's in that prototype West Indian cricketer mould of guys that have been very successful in the IPL over the years. And look, that you called out the big ones. Obviously KL Rahul, Quinton de Kock, Nicholas Puran. I do like the shout out to Marcus Stoinis. There is not a lot to dislike here, quite frankly. And I think the first game probably proved what a lot of us are suspecting, which is this is a team to really take seriously come deep in this tournament. So even the way I thought Bishnoi bowled really well the other night, I don't see a lot of massive holes in this roster, quite frankly. So at the end of the day, I think no doubt injuries and health will play a key part. But if they can keep Mark Wood healthy, this is a team to certainly worry about up the top of the table.
Yeah, I'd probably say just the spin bowling depth would be my biggest concern. But if they keep their first 11 healthy, I feel like they're going to go a long way in this tournament and deep into those playoffs. Let's move on.
I couldn't. Sorry, you go. You go.
No, that's okay, mate. You can finish off. We just had a little bit of technical difficulties there.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to pick up on the spin comment side of things. I guess that you know, from my side, I think they've got enough there. You know, you're right. It's probably not the most spin heavy squad, but I also think that given the strength they've got both in the batting and the fast bowling department, it's going to be very possible for them to lean on, you know, some extra kind of fringe squad cricketers to do a lot of the spin bowling. And I think it's Gautam, isn't it, that bowls the off breaks the other night. I thought he was really tight. And if he can just kind of tie up an end and bowl his 4 overs, you know, as an older veteran, it's not necessarily a bad thing as someone that's played, you know, 14, 15 years of professional cricket to have him on the side as an all-round option. I think it's not the most flashy name, but I don't necessarily dislike their spin department too much.
Yeah, and you've got Deepak Huda as well, who can bowl some extra spinners if need be. Lewis, let's move on to the Mumbai Indians. Feel like Mumbai is one of those teams. They're either up here or they're down the bottom. Without Jasprit Bumrah this year, I'm quite concerned for their bowling attack. There's going to be a large emphasis on Jofra Archer, and he's been quite injury prone over the last couple of years, but you still look through their lineup and they've got some really good quality. They bought Cam Green for a massive price, and I think they see him as a long-term investment. But, you know, you got players like Rohit Sharma, Tim David, Surya Kumar Yadav. Yadav's been in a little bit of a form slump at the moment with those 3 Golden Ducks in the recent ODI series, but he's a quality player and bounce back. Brevis as well. Ishan Kishan's going to bat at the top of the order with Sharma. Tristan Stubbs is in there as well. Jason Beredorf, who can swing the ball. I would anticipate that he's going to get the new ball in a fair few games with Jofra Archer. But Lewis, what do you like about Mumbai and what are their areas for concern?
So, I mean, obviously they finished 10th last year. There's no hiding from that. I don't think they're that weak this year. You know, you mentioned the Cam Green dynamic there, and I do think you're right. There is an element of a long-term investment there. Obviously, you know, you talked about the not having Bumrah and Jai Richardson having an injury as well. Obviously, affects some of their depth. On paper right now, I actually quite like this team, but you are bang on. They're a Jofra Archer injury away from having a lot of concerns, I guess. I'm trying to stick to the positives on this side. I mean, I'm a big Ishan Kishan guy. I just like someone that's as dynamic as him, takes the game on the way he takes the game on. I think Tim David's almost more suited to the IPL than almost any other form of cricket you see him suit up in. I think it really leans into his strengths. I mean, Rohit Sharma's record speaks for itself, and you know, Cam Green as a bowler in the kind of short form level really been hit and miss. But I'm hoping, given the investment laid down by Mumbai on Cam Green, that they'll persist with him throughout what might be, you know, not always the best bowling performances, and that might give him a time to find some confidence. You touched on Behrendorff and his ability to swing the ball, but no, I think this team's certainly going to be a lot more reliable than what they were last year. But much like you know, your previous point there with Lucknow, I do think the lack of established spinner is also something to be a little bit concerned of within this team.
Yeah, I feel like they're similar to Chennai in a way that they're going to have to win a lot more games with the bat rather than with the ball. We know Jofra Archer's class, but you know, the amount of cricket that he's played over the last 2 years is concerning. And yeah, just the lack of spin options is something that concerns me. But, you know, if they score 200 most games, you know, 200 is always going to be a tough chase, no matter what ground that you're playing on in the world. But, yeah, I think Tilak Verma is going to be really important. He bowls the off spin. He can come in and bat at number 4. Where do you see Cam Green batting? Because I know Australia really tried him at the top of the order in that Indian T20 series last September or so, before the T20 World Cup. But I feel like Mumbai are pretty set on having Sharma and Kishan at the top of the order.
So it's probably a two-sided question, right? I think that I sadly see him batting closer to 6 or 7, but I think the best thing for him to do is to either open or bat 3. And look, I mean, you're right. Sharma and Kishan at the top of the order makes perfect sense. I'd like to see them chuck him in at 3. I think that he's an interesting cricketer where it depends on where you watch him on his given day. You know what you think of the speed of his batting. He certainly does seem to be someone that performs better if you give him a couple of siders. And you know, there are very few guys in the league that can come out and hit from first ball, but he's certainly not one of them. So for his development, I think the best thing for them to do is to bat him up the top. My suspicion says, though, that we'll see him come out more at number 6 or so, which is perhaps not where I'd put him, but I understand the logistics of how you get there from their perspective.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one to watch in the coming weeks. Let's move on to Punjab. They got the win, last night over KKR. Unfortunately, have lost Johnny Bairstow to that broken leg that just hasn't healed in time for the IPL, and he's focusing on wicket keeping in preparation for the Ashes. But I really like some of their pickups from the auction. Sam Curran was an expensive buy, but with his T20 World Cup, I think it was justified. Sikandar Raza, I think for 50 lakhs was a great buy. He was sensational during that World Cup as well in the team of the tournament. I'd probably still say that their spin options are of concern to me. Rahul Chahar is not the biggest turner of the ball, but he's been pretty consistent when he's played for Punjab and previously Mumbai. Kagiso Rabada will join the team in the next week or so, and Liam Livingstone didn't play last night either. So there's certainly some upside for Punjab. Shikhar Dhawan's a good operator at the top of the order, and Rajapaksa made a 50 last night as well. So some really positive signs. And from an Australian point of view, Nathan Ellis, I thought was really good with the ball as well.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on Ellis last time we podcasted, but I certainly think he's one to watch in this IPL. Obviously, with Rabada coming back in, there'll be a bit of a crunch for spots. Certainly within the international bowlers side of it, I did really like the idea of replacing Bairstow with Short, as much as obviously on paper that's not as talented of a cricketer. I think at short notice, pardon the pun, I think that he'll be a dynamic option, and some of them in those conditions might actually be able to bowl a little bit as well. I'm really big on Arshdeep Singh's ability to swing the ball up the top of the order. You touched on Sam Curran. I get how you get to that price point. I probably wouldn't have paid that much, but he's such a dynamic cricketer that it's pretty tough to look past. So no, I think from my side, they kind of surprised me a little bit in the first game. I certainly didn't expect them to play as well as they did. But at this point in time, I think they're perhaps a team that some people might be sleeping on and could certainly be threatening come the pointy end of the tournament.
Yeah, I feel like they're going to be one of those teams that's going to be around the mark, but whether they can squeeze into the playoffs is going to be a different thing. I'm just cautious of time, so let's move on to RCB. They've been a frustrating team over the last few years. They were able to make the playoffs last year. They had some good buys at the auction, but they've got a few injury concerns at the moment with Josh Hazlewood and that Achilles that's been bugging him since the start of that India tour. But they've got some really good players in that side. Faf du Plessis is the captain. Virat Kohli, Dinesh Karthik is a great finisher. Hasaranga is one of the best T20 spinners in the world. The big show, Glenn Maxwell. And one that I really like this year would be Reece Topley. I think his body's let him down previously. And it was such a shame as well for Will Jacks to get injured on the eve of the tournament. And Michael Bracewell, the New Zealand off-spinner all-rounder, has gone over to replace him. So, Lewis, what do you like about RCB?
I think you've got to like the pedigree, don't you? You touched on obviously Coley and Duplessis, Maxwell, who's been declared available for that first game, and Kartik fits in that category as well. Hazelwood's been quite consistent for him, and his injury niggles are not to be dismissed in the sense that he's been unhealthy more than he's been healthy for the last let's say 3 years. It does have a little bit of a dad's army feel to it, this team. But I'm also, quite hot on Mohammad Siraj and his ability to bowl fast and straight at the top of the order. So no, I think this team is certainly a contender. That there's going to be kind of two questions here. One is certainly the bowling depth, and you mentioned a few changes there. Bracewell in for Will Jackson, obviously the Reece Topley replacement for Josh Hazlewood in the short term at least. But I think the question is going to come down to two things: bowling depth and also an aging top order, and how well those guys are able to contribute.
Yeah, Harsha Patel was another bowler who I thought did really well last year, and I quite like their bowling. I quite like their bowling attack. They've got Khan Sharma in there as a leg spinning option, but I'll be really interested to see how they line up for the first game. Let's move on to the Rajasthan Royals, a team that I'm very bullish on this year. They didn't do too much at the auction. They picked up Jason Holder to fill in a number 6 or 7 spot, and trying to bowl his 4 overs. I thought Adam Zampa was a great buy at the auction. Joe Root was an unexpected buy, but I feel like he could certainly play a role in this team. They made the final last year, went down to Gujarat, so they didn't need to do too much at the auction. They went really hard for Harry Brook as that middle order batsman and finisher, but I feel like they're pretty sorted across the park. Their first choice 11's pretty good. I'd probably say that second international seamer spot. I know they've got McCoy probably ready to go first up, but yeah, I think there's not too many holes in this squad. What do you like about Rajasthan?
Look, the first thing that comes to mind when I look at the squad is balance. I think they're really well balanced, and that's something that obviously a good mix of pace and spin. You do mention the international seamer part of it, and I think it's a worthwhile question. I mean, I think that I don't know about you. I saw some criticism of the Jason Holder pickup. I thought that I thought that was quite a valid ad. And Trent Bolt being around and around there, thereabouts around the mark. Obviously, a long-term fan of Chahal and his ability to spin the ball both ways. And keep an eye on Kuldeep Sen and his ability to bowl quite quick. Obviously that's something that always can light up the stump. So from my side, this is a really balanced team. I can't poke a lot of holes, short of maybe depth of superstar power, but short of that, I think it's a really balanced team and someone that's going to be quite hard to beat on most nights.
Yeah, Josh Butler's been great for Rajasthan over a number of years now. They chose to retain him through the mega auction as well. Sanju Samson leads the side well. Got some good young talent in Jaswal. Krishna got injured on the eve of the tournament, and they've announced a replacement player for him. But I reckon there's going to be a lot of times where you see this team going in with 3 spinners with Zampa, Chahal and Ashwin. So I feel like that's going to be a pretty formidable opposition bowling attack to deal with, particularly if you've got Trent Bolt swinging the ball early on. Let's move on to the final team in the Sunrisers Hyderabad under a new captain in Aiden Markram, who led the Sunrisers Eastern Cape to their first title in the SA20. Kind of a bit like Rajasthan in a way, not the biggest names, but you look at their squad and it is consistent. I had them down the lower end after the auction, but I might have to reconsider that, having a look at their first 11 for this game. So we've got T. Natarajan, Uram Malik, Bhuvaneshwar Kumar's very helpful in those conditions, bowls a lot in the power play. I probably just see their top order batting potentially struggling a little bit, but Agarwal a couple of years ago was a really formidable opening partner to KL Rahul for Kings, the Punjab Kings. But what are your thoughts on Sunrisers, mate?
I think that I'm going to be a little bit higher on them than you are based on that description. I certainly wouldn't have them penciled in as tournament favourites, but I'm a very, very openly a big fan of Harry Brook and the way he plays his cricket. I think that's hard to look past. Obviously, the veteran presence of Kumar and Adil Rashid, and Washington Sundar's now been a consistent performer for a while. I think it was some tough decisions for them at the auction, when you talk about the decisions they had to make around Paran and Kane Williamson. But I think this is a bit of a refreshed lineup, and I think that they're going to be closer to the playoffs than the other side of the bracket, if you ask me.
Yeah, interesting discussions that we're going to have in a second. We've only got a couple of minutes left. So, Lewis, I'm going to ask you to rank the teams from 10th to champions.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I'll just rattle them off one by one. So I have KKR down the bottom. I have Punjab. I then have RCB. I then Delhi, CSK, Sunrisers, Rajasthan, Mumbai, Lucknow, and Gujarat backing in last year's winners to get it done again.
Interesting. I've gone with something slightly different. When I first was watching the auction, I wasn't super big on what the Sunrisers did. I thought that getting rid of Williamson and Puran wasn't the right thing for them, but it looks like they're going to be quite different. So I had them in 10th originally, but I feel like that might change as we go through the tournament. KK are now in 9th, Kings in 8th, Challengers, RCB in 7th, Mumbai in 6th, Delhi at 5, Chennai at 4, Gujarat at 3, Lucknow at 2, and I've got Rajasthan as my champion. So very interesting. I'm probably going to end up with egg on my face with a couple of those calls, but it's just what I see at the moment. But Lewis, thank you so much for joining me, mate. Always a pleasure to talk cricket with you.
No, thanks for having me, Callum. And listeners, hold him accountable to it. When he gets that wrong, Callum will take an egg to his face live on camera for everyone's pleasure.
Thank you very much for joining us at home. We'll hope you tune in for another episode.